you a very high-level introduction to Trustworthy AI. And it's a very high level because literally we're going to be covering a number of topics and we'll be talking about each one of them for hours. And I don't exaggerate there. They are very complex topics in their own right, but we're not going to do that. I'm going to be very quick, just give you a taste for what it is, and maybe that'll spark your interest and you'll explore more in your own time. I'm going to use the term AI as generic for anything you want to call it: statistical modeling, deep learning, machine learning, artificial intelligence. I'll use AI as a catch-all for all those things, okay? So apologies if you strongly disagree with that, but it's just to make things simpler. So once we've got that covered, I'm just going to give you a very, very quick outline of what we're going to talk today. It's just the key questions in life. What is this? Why should I care? And then how do I do it? What can I do about that? And then we'll have a very quick summary at the very end. So what is trustworthy AI? Well, it's literally AI that you can trust. And that sounds like a very, very stupid definition. It's literally that. It's an AI that you can trust it to work as you intended, to do the right thing, to be reliable. And when we say to do the right thing, we mean it from a technical, but also from an ethical point of view. It's AI that you know is not going to have any ill intent. It's not going to cause harm. So as you can see there in the definition of trustworthy, there are key items that will become very relevant later, and we'll hear about that later: reliability, dependability, honesty, integrity, and also truthfulness. So I don't know how you feel about this, but from my point of view, it's a very tall ask, to achieve all those things. But that is where we are, and then you'll see very quickly why this is becoming an important topic. Okay, so there is another way to look at the definition of trustworthy AI. I've included there a link to the European Commission's high-level expert group on artificial intelligence. They have a number of publications on this topic, and the one that is featured in there is their ethics guidelines for trustworthy AI. I would encourage you all, if you have an interest in this, to go and check that document. I found it very, very good. They have more useful documents, like guidelines for assessing if your AI is trustworthy or not. And they're not the only ones. There are many documents in the public domain that can help you with this. So if you feel any interest, just feel free to drop me a message, and I'll provide some of them, or let you know where you can find more. But these guidelines basically define trustworthy AI as AI that is lawful, ethical, and robust. When we talk about lawful, obviously we're talking about complying with all the relevant legislation. So that would be data protection legislation such as GDPR, any consumer protection legislation. We could be talking as well about the non-discrimination and so on. When we refer to robust, it's obviously from a technical point of view mostly. And I suspect that as they're saying, you know how to achieve that, you know how to deal with that. It's not a challenge that should be underestimated, but I imagine that you know what you have to do in that regard. Now, when it comes to ethical aspects, that is actually a very challenging topic, because we all have a very different idea of what ethical means. And these can change significantly between individuals, between cultures and societies. And just try it yourself. Just as you probably speak with your friends about how they feel about the different topics in life, and you realize that we all have a very different idea of what is right, what is wrong. So that makes it quite challenging to agree on a number of principles around this, but this is nonetheless necessary. That is one of the bigger challenges around this. So now, why should you care? I picked up this example because I found it very, very useful on a number of topics. Just to give you a bit of background, Apple issued a credit card which you could use to get some access to credit. You could borrow money through that card, and there was an AI algorithm in the background that would decide what the terms of your loan should be and how much credit should be given and so on. So there was an Apple engineer who decided to ask for a loan, and the algorithm would assess you as your family unit. So this engineer provided his details alongside his wife's, and then his wife did the same herself. And then they realized that the male engineer received better or more beneficial terms than his wife, even that the input was the same. And that, of course, that prompted some investigation as to whether the algorithm was discriminating against women. And well, the evidence appeared to be pointing in that direction. Now, we're not going to really discuss whether it was or not, but what is really revealing in this case is some extras that I put in there. No one from the company was able to describe how the algorithm even worked or justify its output. Now, I think in defense of Apple's engineers, they probably knew they could explain how deep learning works, how a random forest algorithm works, but they could not explain how that particular algorithm was working, how a specific input would generate a specific output. And that is very important, because when things go bad, people want an explanation. And if you're unable to give it, then I think it is fair to say that you don't really have a lot of trust in the algorithm. Do you really trust the engineers as well? Do you think they know what they're doing? So that is part of quite a number of very, very significant questions that need to be addressed. And as I say, it goes back to the concept of trust. Do you really trust Apple to do the right thing here? And I think there were some indications that made people think that maybe they don't. I think it is worthwhile thinking about what Apple could have done to address all these things, and this is something that we'll come across later in the presentation. What could Apple have done to tackle this in a different way? So now, when it comes to another example I picked up from insurance, Nike is the National American Insurance Commissioners Association, and it's basically an association of states insurance regulators. And they were commenting in this case about the discrimination based on race, and which they believe was endemic in the insurance industry, and that something had to be done. So there was the gentleman Birnbaum, who was commenting on the topic and saying that the regulatory framework had become obsolete. It was no longer fit for purpose, and with now the rise of big data, there was a need for an additional a new regulatory framework that could tackle the new development, that could oversee AI development in an effective way. He also commented on data and accountability and the need for transparency, which we'll see these again later on, and they'll become very important topics on this. So as you can see, there is quite a very significant push in society for a better way to address AI, something that gives confidence to users, to society, and regulators. And finally, just another example with an article from Forbes that basically says that AI has resolved ethical issues for 90% of businesses. I think that is very revealing, and I think it is something that should make us all pause to think about what it is that we're doing with AI, and even that we have the best of intentions, we're very likely to get in trouble at some point. And how prepared we are to deal with that and to react and to address any issues and any harm that we may cause, that'll be a very differentiating factor between successful companies and those who don't. And I think you only need to consider Facebook and the recent scandals with Cambridge Analytica and so on, and the reputational damage that Facebook has experienced as a consequence of that. So I think it is a topic that we definitely need to be quite mindful of and take into consideration. And now this finally, just to give you more food for thought, this is a slide that I took inspiration from an article I read in the Foreign Affairs magazine quite a few years ago. In that article, they were talking about the genetic engineering, and the author was just pointed out that the unrestrained development in sciences always resulted in terrible consequences. And the examples were given. We have a picture there of Oliver Twist, which in my mind is always the foremost example of how wrong capitalism can go if nothing is done about it. I've put a picture of the First World War to just remind us of what horrors chemistry brought to the world as well. And there's the nuclear bomb to think what that physics has given us a lot of fantastic developments for society, but also some that are not so good. So the author of the article was saying, well, if we don't regulate genetic engineering, what kind of horrors are we going to have to witness before we do that? And I think one could say the same about AI. So just for pure amusement, I've included Terminator there. I'm not necessarily implying there's going to be a rise of the robots and the machines will rebel and kill us all and all that. But I think it is worthwhile thinking about how wrong the world could go if we don't tackle AI in a responsible way. I was making this point recently at the roundtable. I gave this example, and another speaker just mentioned that I was unfair because science was neutral, was not necessarily evil, and it was the use we people make of science. But then he moved on to talking about the work he's doing, advising some government about the applying AI for to optimize their nuclear deterrence systems, because nuclear missiles are so fast now that no human could react quickly enough. So he was advocating for using AI for that, and suddenly my point seemed extremely valid once again. So hopefully now you have an understanding of why this is an important topic, and we need to talk about it. So I'm gonna give you a very high-level overview of what how you can tackle this, how you can implement a governance framework that can help you achieve trustworthy AI. So I've listed a number of topics there, and each publication would give you a different list, but we'll all be talking about similar concepts, maybe with different classifications. So the first one would be proportionality, to just have a feel for how much you should be doing in each case. You know, how far is too far, or how far is not enough, that type of thing. And of course, you need to consider human agency and human oversight to make sure that someone has some sense that things are still going right. If you apply automated AI and that type of thing, then we need to cover technical robustness and security as well, data governance and privacy, of course, transparency. There is also a need for explainability, as you saw in some of the examples before, and very importantly, fairness and non-discrimination and accountability. As I said, like we could spend a lot of time talking about every single one of those topics, and but you know, fortunately, maybe for you, we won't today. So the first of it, when it comes to proportionality, well, we're talking about here, obviously, we need to have a proportionate approach to this. It cannot be something that hinders any AI development. It's something that should contribute to making sure that our development of AI models is trustworthy, is safe, and is going to help us achieve our goals to deliver good, solid AI that causes no harm. So we need to consider the intended use and the potential impact, and that should inform our proportionality requirements. So if we're simply going to implement some system that will recognize handwritten characters, some OCR type of system, then we need to think, okay, what are the potential implications of getting this wrong? And if the implications are trivial, like nothing really, it's just someone who's going to have to double check that in person, then obviously the proportionality can be very low. Like the governance requirements can be very low because there's not really that much at the stake. However, in the case of credit card, like for Apple, well, the consequences of somebody not having access to credit can be very significant for that person's life. If people could not get access to mortgages, that has huge implications for those people, but also for society in general. So suddenly the burden of governance is very high because there is a lot at stake. So it's important to develop a framework that tells you how far you need to go in each case. You know, when there is a requirement to go the extra mile to make sure everything is right, everything is working as intended, and so on. And moving on to human agency and oversight. Well, we need to respect the right, and this is something that is embedded in some legislation. We need to respect the right of some people to not be subject to a decision based on automated processing. And that means that some individuals will want the usual, just I want to talk to somebody. I don't want to talk to a machine. I don't want a machine to do this, to take this decision for myself. I want a person involved. And well, as I say, in some countries that is embedded in legislation, and we have to respect that. In addition, we need to make sure that there is some kind of human oversight at some point. And once again, we go back to the proportionality principle. If the stakes are low, then maybe we don't really need it very often. If the stakes are high, there has to be human oversight somewhere. So you'll see in this topic the concept of human in the loop, human on the loop, human in command, and that simply refers how at what stage of development there is human oversight and what type of oversight there is. If it is just only a design, maybe monitoring the use, or there is human oversight at every single step of development and deployment and use as well. So we're going into robustness and security, and I think this is probably the area where data scientists will feel more at home. Obviously, you need to make sure that the system, AI system, is working as intended, that it is accurate, that it is reliable, but also it's important to have a backup plan. So what do you do if something goes wrong? What do you do if, like Apple, you receive an inquiry saying that maybe your algorithm is discriminating and you need to stop using it? What do you do then? And well, the answer might be we stop operating or we stop applying the algorithm. Well, can you live with that? So it's important to think in terms of the consequences and what you have to do if things went wrong. It's also important to make sure that your AI systems are safe from any cyber attacks, so that some third party can just take control of them and modify them, or that they're also protected from misuse. Somebody who's not really necessarily um, switch on as to how the model is supposed to apply, or the pitfalls, and then it is implemented in a way that was not what it was intended. So there has to be some safeguards around that to make sure that that things don't go wrong. When we talk about data governance and privacy, once again, we need to respect the privacy of data subjects. We need to make sure that private data remains private, that it is protected and safe from any hacking, that type of thing. But also very important, and you're probably aware, the quality and integrity of data is hugely important in the development of any AI systems. So there has to be a framework that defines what that means and how you're implementing that. What do we mean when we say integrity of data, and what do we do when data quality is not good enough? What are the steps that we're going to take? Do we just not do anything because data is not good enough, or what do we do? So it's important that you think about that and you document how you think it is best to proceed in each case. Then going into transparency, this depends a lot on the audience. Like, you're going to have to be transparent, but to whom? Transparent within your own organization, so transparency with other data scientists. That's very different than being transparent to regulators or to your customers. There's no point in explaining the technical details of your algorithm to your customers, because the vast majority will not understand it. But you have to be transparent in some way, and that means maybe simplifying the way your algorithm works in plain English, in a way that everybody can understand. But if you're speaking with someone who's doing a peer review, then maybe you're going to be transparent at a greater detail. So you're going to provide your designing notes, maybe the code, the data, the rationale for all the decisions that you made alongside. And it's very important that we think about this, because I think in my experience, it's one of the key elements of trustworthy AI, to make sure that somebody can look at what you did and decide, like, well, yeah, I think this person did the right thing here, or I agree with every step here. Then in terms of explainability, I think this is a very difficult topic at times, because just because we are able to explain how an algorithm works doesn't mean we can explain how a specific input set turns into specific output. And once again, the Apple Card example is very relevant here. So we need to take a hard look at ourselves and think whether we really have the ability to explain fully how our models are working, and if that ability is good enough, depending on the case. So this is where it comes again, the proportionality principle. Some cases we can live without really understanding, or without being able to explain how it works, because look, no one really cares, because the outcome is not that important for anybody. It's useful, but not critical. But say if I were pricing a house, well, people will want to know what's driving the price of the house. So I'm going to have to be able to explain what's going on and how the model works and what factors are included, and so on. With all these, of course, we need to take into consideration the confidentiality of a lot of our work. There could be commercial sensitivities around it. So it's not that because you have to be transparent, you're gonna tell the secrets of everything you do to the first person that asks. But we need to be able to explain when some parties or some individuals come and ask for those questions. If you remember again the case with Apple, what you cannot have is that that a regulator comes around very worried and says, how is this working? And you say, well, we cannot really explain. That I can guarantee is really not the situation you want to be in. And then finally, we move on to fairness and non-discrimination and accountability. Accountability really is what it says, is that that there is an audit trail that people can replicate your results, can see who was responsible for what. Also means that if you are the person developing a model, then you're obviously not going to be the person reviewing it too, because you have a natural bias. So there has to be somebody else reviewing what you've done. In addition, just going to fairness and non-discrimination, this is probably one of the most difficult concepts at the moment because there's a lot you don't know, and that means you're only limited to your awareness as your experience in life is. So if you're not, if you've never experienced discrimination, then you're probably not really good at spotting the potential for discrimination. And this is where diversity in a team really becomes very, very important. So women experience life very differently than men. So having women in your team is really useful in this regard because they can spot things that for us men are not obvious. And the same happens with people from different countries or people from different backgrounds, even different ages. It really becomes an asset in this regard because no matter how much you think about this and how well-meaning you are, you're very likely going to incur in some discrimination in an unintended way. Now, when we talk about discrimination, obviously all statistical models are meant to discriminate, but discriminate in a lawful way. Like you're going to discriminate between customers who are going to buy a product, customers who are not going to buy, good risk versus bad risk, and so on. But you cannot discriminate based on gender, for example. You cannot discriminate on race or ethnic background, things like that. So that's what you need to keep an eye on to make sure that that your AI is not discriminating in a way that you never intended. And quite often this goes back to your data. If your data has any biases, then your model will. And sometimes it's also how we implement the model, how we use our AI models that brings the bias as well. So we need to be aware of that. It's also important to consider about the ethical implications of the behavioral aspects of our models. So our models are going to reward or to incentivize people to act in specific ways. So we need to consider if that incentive is actually good or bad. And I'll just give you an example. When many years ago, somebody stole a digital camera, and I made the denounce, and then I with the police report, I went to the insurance company, and I claimed for a refund. And the insurance company asked me if there had been any violence. If there had been any violence during the robbery, I said no, fortunately not. So well, then we don't cover it. And that really hit me. So everybody tells you that you need to avoid violence. Just hand over the camera, and that is not worthwhile fighting for it or risking your life. And yet the insurance company was incentivizing me to do precisely that, to have a little fight, a little scuffle with the robber, so that I could make a valid claim. And I think that is clearly wrong. But it's something that we need to be aware of. How is our system incentivizing people to act? And if we take it to an extreme, if everybody followed the incentives that our model indicates, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? So it's a very important element in this. And just to finalize, I think we've now seen what trustworthy AI is. So summarize like lawful, ethical, and robust. Now you know what that means, hopefully. Achieving it minimizes the risk of making mistakes. It makes you better at your job as data scientist. Also, it'll reduce the risk of your business getting in trouble, and it has a positive impact in society, which is a worthwhile goal, I think, as well. And what that means, how you implement these things, you've seen the topics of human oversight, robustness, security, data governance and privacy, transparency, explainability, fairness and non-discrimination, and accountability.